Clara Monroe's fingers lingered on the final piano key, the last note drifting through the Lancaster Hotel's golden lounge, where chandeliers glowed and velvet curtains framed the room. The applause of wealthy guests humming in the background, but her eyes were fixed on the slip of paper tucked beneath her sheet music, its jagged ink whispering a threat. "Meet me backstage, I know what you're hiding." Her heart tightened. No one here knew her secret. Not the shame she buried, not the reason she played these late-night sets, yet someone had found a way to pierce her walls. She scanned the room, her pulse racing, spotting a man in a tailored suit leaning at the bar. His gaze sharp, his stare unshakable, and though her body screamed to run, her smile remained composed as she struck the closing chord and rose from the piano, carrying the note like a burning brand as she slipped behind the curtain and into the narrow hallway. The corridor smelled of old champagne and polished wood, her heels clicking too loudly against the marble floor as if warning her to turn back. But she pressed forward, only to find a figure swaying in the shadows, his tie loose, his eyes glazed with alcohol and entitlement, his grin crooked. "There you are, piano girl," he slurred, stepping closer, his cologne suffocating, his voice thick with suggestion. "Heard you do more than play." Clara's stomach twisted, but her words stayed firm. "I don't know what you mean," as she backed against the wall, clutching the note until its edges dug into her skin. He moved again, his breath hot with whiskey. "Don't play innocent. I saw you sneaking around last week. You're hiding something, aren't you?" His hand shot out, grazing her arm, and panic surged in her chest. He couldn't know. He couldn't have seen the secret exchange that had taken place in the alley, the one she thought was buried forever. "Get away from me," she warned, her voice low and steady, though her pulse hammered. He laughed, cruel and confident, reaching for her again until another voice cut the air like a blade. "Step away from her." At the end of the hall stood Ethan Cross, the enigmatic billionaire owner of the Lancaster, his tall frame carved against the dim light, his dark eyes burning with quiet fury. The drunk froze, his bravado crumbling, his hand dropping as he stammered, I didn't mean anything. Just talking." Ethan's jaw tightened, his words low but heavy with command. "You're done talking." The man stumbled away, vanishing into the lounge's noise. Clara's knees weakened with relief as she turned to Ethan, his gaze shifting from hard steel to something gentler as he asked, "Are you all right?" His voice was calm yet edged with concern, and though she tried to hide it, the threatening note pressed against her skin like a second heartbeat. "Yes," she whispered, forcing steadiness. "Thank you." But Ethan didn't look away, his eyes lingering, searching her face as if trying to read the truth she had locked away. And in that dim corridor, heavy with unspoken tension, Clara Monroe realized her life had just stepped into dangerous new territory. The silence in the corridor stretched as Ethan Cross stood before Clara, his presence filling the narrow space, sharp and commanding yet softened by the concern in his eyes. Up close, she noticed the faint stubble along his jaw, the dark sweep of his hair falling slightly across his brow, the sheer weight of him like a storm contained. She tucked the crumpled note deeper into her sleeve, praying he hadn't seen it, but his gaze lingered as if he could sense the turmoil she carried. "No one should feel unsafe in my hotel," he said quietly, his voice low and steady, carrying a sincerity she hadn't expected from a man of his power. She nodded, unsure how to answer, her throat dry as the air between them seemed to vibrate with something unspoken. Ethan shifted, his hand twitching as if he wanted to reach for her, but instead he gestured toward the exit. "Let me walk you to your car." For a heartbeat she hesitated, the threatening words of the note echoing in her mind like a warning, but refusing felt like fear, and Clara Monroe did not want to be seen as afraid. She forced her voice steady. "Okay." Together they moved through the hotel's back halls, passing mirrors framed in gold that reflected their silhouettes, hers small and tense, his tall and unreadable. The soft clink of glasses and distant laughter filtered faintly from the lounge, but here the silence grew thick, heavy with what neither dared to say. Outside, the night air was sharp and cool, scented with rain on pavement, the city glowing with restless lights. Her old sedan sat waiting in the far corner of the employee lot, its chipped paint and worn frame standing awkwardly among the polished luxury cars of the valet line. Ethan stopped a few steps away, his hands sliding into his pockets, his voice measured. "You don't have to come back tomorrow if you don't want to. I'll see to it you're paid for the week." His words were kind, but they struck like pity, and Clara straightened, her chest tightening. "I need this job," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "I'm fine, really." Ethan studied her, tilting his head, his expression unreadable but his eyes softer now, a flicker of something almost vulnerable. "You're not what I expected," he murmured, half to himself. Clara's defenses rose, her brow tightening. "What's that supposed to mean?" His gaze held hers for a moment that seemed to stretch, then he spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Most people here wear their stories like medals. They flaunt them. You don't. You're a mystery." The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the faint warmth of his breath in the night air, the pounding of her own heart. She tore her eyes away, fumbling for her keys. "Maybe I just don't like talking about myself," she said with a forced laugh, but the truth was far darker. He saw too much and she couldn't afford to be seen. Ethan stepped back, giving her space, his voice calm, steady. "Fair enough. But if you ever need anything..." He let the sentence trail, leaving it hanging in the cool air like an unfinished promise. Clara slid into her car, her hands tight on the wheel, her voice faint. "Good night, Mr. Cross." His reply came low, almost challenging. "Ethan." She didn't answer, shutting the door and starting the engine. As she drove off, her eyes caught him in the rearview mirror, standing motionless in the lot, hands in his pockets, his gaze following her into the night. The note still pressed against her wrist, its words a silent scream. And though she tried to focus on the road ahead, her mind clung to the image of Ethan Cross's silhouette watching her, the memory of his voice lingering like a dangerous spark she couldn't smother. 3 nights later, Clara Monroe sat once again at the piano in the Lancaster Hotel's lounge, her fingers coaxing a melancholy jazz melody into the air, her mind haunted by the crumpled note in her sleeve and the shadow of Ethan Cross's watchful eyes. The crowd murmured, glasses clinked like distant bells, but her thoughts were elsewhere, circling the questions that had begun to consume her. Then a waiter approached, his silver tray holding not a drink but a bouquet of pristine white roses, their petals soft and luminous beneath the lounge's amber lights. Nestled among them was a card, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. "Play for me tonight. Private room. PM." Clara's breath caught, the scent of the roses rich and dizzying, their beauty clashing with the fear curling in her chest. She glanced around, half expecting Ethan to be watching, but the lounge was filled only with strangers' faces. The waiter leaned close, his voice low. "Mr. Cross said it's optional," he murmured, and then he slipped back into the crowd. Clara's fingers faltered, a sour note breaking through the music. Optional. Nothing about Ethan Cross had ever felt optional. His presence, his voice, his gaze, they pulled at her like gravity. She tucked the card into her purse, where the old threatening note already burned like a secret brand. And suddenly she was trapped between 2 men. 2 messages, 2 dangers. By 7:55, she stood before the heavy oak door of the private dining room on the Lancaster's top floor, her black dress clinging to her frame like armor. The carved vines across the wood seemed to writhe in the dim light, and for a moment her reflection in the brass handle looked like a stranger. She smoothed her hair, her hand trembling as she lifted it to knock. She could walk away now, disappear back into the faceless crowd, bury her secrets again. But the card in her purse still burned, and Ethan Cross was not a man easily ignored. The door swung open, and there he stood, Ethan, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled back, a flicker of a smile playing at his lips. "You came," he said, his voice low, warm, aflame in the cool air. The room behind him glowed in soft golden light, a single chandelier scattering shadows across a table set for 2. And beyond the wide glass window the city glittered like 1,000 daring promises. Clara stepped inside, the air scented with cedar and something richer, his cologne perhaps, or the weight of answers she wasn't ready for. "You don't strike me as someone who hesitates," he said, his tone playful yet sharp, watching her every move as he gestured for her to sit. Clara forced her voice even. "Maybe I'm just curious. Why me, Ethan? You don't even know me." He poured red wine, the liquid glowing like velvet fire as he slid the glass toward her, his fingers brushing the stem with deliberate care. "I know you play as if every note is a confession no one else can hear," he said quietly. "That's enough for now." She didn't lift the glass, her eyes narrowing. "You sent roses. Most men would have sent a message." He chuckled low and rough, the sound wrapping around her. I'm not most men, and you're not most women. The words lingered between them, heavy and deliberate, and as the soft glow of the chandelier flickered against his face, Clara Monroe realized she was already stepping into a game she didn't understand. A game where every glance, every word, every silence from Ethan Cross felt like a move designed to draw her closer. The chandelier's glow shimmered across crystal glasses and porcelain plates, but Clara Monroe felt the weight of Ethan Cross's eyes more than the elegance of the room. Dinner arrived, seared scallops glistening with butter, a salad bright with color. But the food tasted heavy on her tongue, her mind circling the danger of his attention. He asked about her music, about her dreams, and though she deflected with careful words, his gaze pressed deeper, peeling at the edges of her guarded heart. He leaned back, swirling his wine as he spoke with quiet certainty. "You're real, Clara. Most people here, they're playing parts. But your music tells the truth." She looked down, her fork pausing mid-air, her chest tightening at the vulnerability his words forced into the open. "You don't know that," she said, her voice sharper than intended, but he only tilted his head, eyes steady, as though his instincts had already confirmed what she refused to admit. Then he rose, crossing the room with unhurried grace, his hand lowering the needle of a record player. A soft saxophone spilled into the air, notes of longing filling the silence. He turned back to her, his voice low, smooth. "Play something." Her eyes followed his gesture to the grand piano gleaming in the corner, its black surface polished like obsidian. She hesitated, her breath uneven, then stood, her black dress whispering across her skin as she walked toward it. Sitting before the keys, her fingers hovered for a moment, then fell into a haunting melody of her own making. Each note slow and aching, carrying pieces of her she never gave away. Ethan stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the glittering city, his glass of wine untouched, his attention fixed entirely on her. When the last note faded, the silence grew heavier than the music itself. Ethan stepped closer, his voice almost reverent. "What was that?" She swallowed, her hand still trembling faintly over the keys. "Something I wrote. It's personal." His eyes softened, his tone lowering until it brushed against her skin. It sounded like longing, like you're reaching for something you can't quite name. Her pulse raced, heat rising beneath her skin. She stood abruptly, trying to put space between them. "You don't know me well enough to say that," she said, though her voice betrayed a tremor she couldn't suppress. He didn't move closer, but his gaze followed her, steady, unrelenting. "Maybe not," he said softly, "but I'd like to." Back at the table, his presence loomed like a quiet storm. Every glance, every word, every silence pulled at her defenses until she could hardly tell where the music ended and the man began. And as she left that night, roses pressed into her hands, his final words echoed like a vow she could not ignore. "Play for me again." The weeks slipped by in a blur of music and glances that lingered too long. Night after night, Ethan Cross appeared in the corner booth of the Lancaster Hotel's lounge, his presence heavy even when he said nothing, his eyes following Clara Monroe as she played. Their conversations after her sets grew sharper, layered with teasing and tension, each exchange a step closer to something neither of them dared name. Then one storm-soaked evening, when the lounge was nearly empty and the thunder outside rolled like a drum, Ethan rose from his booth and approached the piano as Clara packed away her sheet music. "You're soaked," she said, noticing the droplets clinging to his hair, his shirt damp from the rain. He shrugged with a boyish grin that disarmed her for a heartbeat. "Walked from the office. Didn't trust the valet with my car." She arched a brow, trying to mask the way her pulse quickened. "You own this place, Ethan. You could have stayed dry." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, I like the rain. Makes everything feel alive." The space between them tightened, charged, and Clara's breath grew uneven. She turned away, fumbling with her bag. "I should get going. Long night." His voice followed, quiet but firm. "Let me drive you." Not a question, not a demand, but a statement that left little room for refusal. She hesitated, thinking of her rusted sedan waiting alone in the dark lot, the rain pouring like a warning. The memory of Ethan's silhouette in her mirror came back to her, dangerous yet impossible to ignore. "Fine," she said, slipping on her coat. "But no detours." His chuckle was soft, steady. "Scout's honor." His car was sleek, its leather interior carrying the scent of rain and quiet wealth. Streetlights blurred across the windows, streaks of gold and red as the wipers kept time with the soft jazz spilling from the radio. They spoke little, the silence between them heavy with everything unspoken, until Clara felt his eyes flicker toward her, tracing the curve of her jaw, lingering just a second too long before returning to the road. Outside her modest apartment building, dwarfed by the city's towers, Ethan parked but didn't move to unlock the doors. The rain drummed against the roof, sealing them into a private cocoon. Clara reached for the handle. "Thanks for the ride," she whispered, but his voice stopped her, raw and low. "Clara?" Her name sounded like a secret on his lips. She turned, meeting his gaze, and saw the storm inside him. His eyes fixed not on her eyes, but on her mouth. Unguarded, desperate. "I promised myself I wouldn't kiss you yet," he murmured, his voice rough, fighting itself. "But you're making that impossible." Her breath caught, every instinct screaming to run, but her body betrayed her, leaning toward the fire in his eyes. "Then why fight it?" she whispered back. He didn't hesitate. His hand cupped her face, firm but gentle, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was deep and slow, like a melody she'd been chasing her entire life. The world outside dissolved, the rain, the city, the fear, until there was only him, his fingers threading into her hair, her hands gripping his coat, the spark between them igniting into something wild and consuming. When they finally broke apart, her lips tingled, her breath uneven, and his smile was soft but dangerous. "Good night, Clara." She stumbled out of the car, the rain sharp against her heated skin, her heart racing as she hurried into the safety of her apartment. But inside, locked away from the world, her fingers pressed to her mouth, still tingling from his kiss, and she knew nothing about her life would ever feel the same again. Days passed in a blur of stolen glances and restless nights until one evening, after her set in the Lancaster Hotel's lounge, a waiter slipped a key card into Clara Monroe's hand, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Cross requests your presence at his penthouse," he said softly, the weight of the card cold and heavy in her palm. For a moment Clara froze. The penthouse was not a dining room, not a lounge, but his private world. Every instinct told her to say no, to protect the fragile wall she had built, yet curiosity, or something far more dangerous, made her nod. "Tell him I'll be there." By 6:55 she stood in the glass-walled elevator, her reflection pale against the city's skyline spilling below. The keycard burned in her purse beside the memory of the threatening note she had once destroyed, a secret she could never erase. When the door slid open, the penthouse stretched before her, a cathedral of glass and steel with the city glittering like spilled jewels beneath it. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers and the scent of garlic and herbs filled the air. Ethan stood in the open kitchen, sleeves rolled back, a linen apron tied loosely around his waist, his hands moving with surprising ease as he stirred a pan of creamy risotto. Clara blinked, caught off guard. "You're cooking?" she asked, her voice thin, her heels clicking against polished stone as she stepped closer. He glanced up, the sharpness in his face softening into a grin. "Thought you'd appreciate something real. No pretense tonight." She leaned against the counter, her pulse unsteady as she watched him plate roasted chicken, bright greens, simple food that felt strangely intimate. He poured her a glass of red wine, their fingers brushing when he handed it over, the spark of contact lingering in her skin. They ate by the window, candlelight dancing across his face, the city a glittering backdrop behind them. He studied her, his eyes steady and unguarded. "Tell me something true," he said, his voice quiet, cutting through the saxophone's hum. Her fork stilled, her chest tight. The truth was a locked box, her past too dangerous to open. So she offered a safer lie. "I used to dream of playing Carnegie Hall. Not for fame, just to feel like I was enough." Ethan's gaze softened, the sincerity in his voice disarming. "You're more than enough. You play like you're pouring your soul into the keys." She looked away quickly, the city lights blurring. "Your turn," she said, her voice brittle. "Something true." He leaned back, tracing the rim of his glass. "I'm tired of being what everyone expects, the billionaire, the name, the myth. Sometimes I want to disappear into a life where no one knows me." The confession hung between them, raw and heavy, until he reached across the table, his fingers grazing hers. Her breath caught, her body sparking under his touch. "Dessert?" he asked, his tone lighter, breaking the moment. He brought out warm apple tart, the crust flaky, the fruit sweet, his hand lingering on her back as he set the plate before her. The touch was quiet fire, and she shivered beneath it. Later, as the candles burned low, he stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me." Not a question, but an inevitability. She let him pull her close, the saxophone guiding their slow sway, her cheek brushing against his chest, his breath warm against her hair. His words came like a murmur against her skin. "You feel like music." Her heart pounded as he led her down the hall, the air cooler, the music fading. His bedroom was spare but inviting, a bed draped in dark linens, a lamp casting shadows that seemed to shift with the beating of her pulse. He framed her face with his hands, his eyes burning into hers. His voice dropped rough with desire. "I'll be gentle, Clara, but I can't promise I won't want more." She should have pulled away, should have remembered the danger of the note, the secrets she carried. But his touch was a current pulling her under. Her nod was small, her breath shallow, and then his mouth found hers, slow and deep. A kiss that unraveled every wall she had built. His hand slid to her back, unzipping her dress with deliberate care, the fabric slipping to the floor as her skin burned beneath his gaze. That night was a slow fire, tenderness blending with hunger, reverence giving way to passion. His hands mapped her body as though learning a language, and when desire overtook him, she met it, her fingers clutching his shoulders, her breath tangled with his, the rhythm of their bodies a song no piano could capture. Hours later, tangled in the sheets, her head resting on his chest, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, Clara knew she had crossed a line she could never retreat from. Morning light crept through the glass walls of the penthouse, painting the city in pale golds and silvers as Clara Monroe stirred beneath the silk sheets. The warmth of Ethan Cross still lingered in her skin, every breath recalling his hands, his voice, his vow whispered in the dark. She reached for him, expecting the weight of his body beside her, but the space was cold and empty. On the nightstand lay a folded note, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. "Had to leave early. Last night wasn't enough." A smile flickered across her lips, fragile and unguarded, her fingers tracing the letters as his words echoed in her mind. "I'll be gentle, but I can't promise I won't want more." For a fleeting moment she let herself believe it, let herself imagine the note was a tether, a promise that this was only the beginning. But the illusion shattered before it could settle. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting with a headline that sliced through her chest. Billionaire Ethan Cross spotted leaving nightclub with supermodel Isabella Reed. Her breath caught, the room tilting as she opened the photo, a grainy shot of Ethan, his coat slung casually over one shoulder, Isabella at his side, her arm looped through his. Her perfect smile tilted toward him with an intimacy the camera didn't have to invent. The timestamp burned into Clara's mind. 2 a.m. Hours after he had left her bed. Hours after he had held her like she was the only thing that mattered. Her chest tightened, her throat burning as the phone slipped from her fingers, landing on the sheets with a soft thud. Had she been a distraction, a passing thrill before he returned to his real world? The one of cameras and flashing lights, of glamorous women who belonged on billboards while she clung to dimly lit lounges? The note on the nightstand mocked her now, its words twisting cruelly, its promise stripped bare. She rose, gathering her dress from the floor with trembling hands, the navy fabric creased with the memory of her surrender. She slipped it on, the zipper biting against her skin. Her reflection in the mirror, a stranger, a woman naive enough to believe a man like Ethan Cross could want her, only her. The penthouse, once warm and intimate, felt hollow, a stage where she had played a part she didn't know she'd been cast in. Downstairs, the Lancasters' lobby buzzed with morning activity. Bellhops wheeling luggage, guests greeting the day. Clara kept her head down, her heels clicking against marble as she hurried to the employee lot. Her rusted sedan waited, its chipped paint a reminder of her world, small and worn, nothing like his. She sank into the driver's seat, the smell of old leather grounding her as her phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. "You left without saying goodbye. Everything okay?" Her thumb hovered over the screen, anger and hurt battling inside her chest, but she locked it, shoved the phone aside, and started the engine. Back at her apartment, the wilted roses Ethan had once sent stared at her from the coffee table, their petals curled inward like secrets folding in on themselves. She scrolled through the article again, each line another cut. Cross and Reed, once a power couple, spotted laughing together. Sources claim they've been in touch for weeks. The word carved into her, weeks. all while she had been falling deeper into something she could no longer deny. Her breath shook, her hands curling into fists, as questions clawed through her. Was he playing her from the start? Was she only a footnote in a life too big for her? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make him feel the fracture he had carved into her chest. But the thought of his calm, unreadable eyes silenced her. What could she possibly say? Why her? Why not her? The questions tasted small, desperate, and she hated herself for asking them even in her own mind. That night, when she sat at the piano in the lounge, her black dress clinging like armor, her fingers found the keys with steady defiance. The crowd blurred, their faces irrelevant, their applause a distant hum. She poured her heartbreak into the music. Every note a confession she would never give him aloud. She wouldn't look for Ethan Cross. She wouldn't let him steal that too. But inside she already knew. The man had not just taken her innocence. He had stolen something far more dangerous. He had stolen her hope. Months slipped by, each one a quiet battle. Clara Monroe played her sets at the Lancaster Hotel's lounge, her fingers weaving songs of longing and defiance, her music becoming her only refuge as Ethan Cross disappeared from her life. She ignored his messages, deleting each one unread, telling herself she was stronger without him, that she had chosen this silence. The amber glow of the lounge became her world, its velvet drapes and polished tables the only stage where she could still pretend she was whole. But her body betrayed her secret before her heart could. It began with missed periods, then another, and finally a test in the dim bathroom of her apartment. 2 lines stark against white plastic. Pregnant. The word struck like a stone in her stomach, heavy with fear and wonder. She told no one. Not her co-workers, not her few friends, and certainly not Ethan. He was gone, likely back with Isabella Reed. Their names splashed across headlines she refused to read. She would not beg for his attention, would not hand him this part of her life to discard as easily as he had discarded her. Her world shifted around the secret growing inside her. She dressed in looser clothes, draped herself in shawls, positioned herself carefully at the piano to hide the curve that slowly betrayed her. Mornings blurred with ginger tea to soothe nausea. Evenings were lost to the piano's embrace. Her fingers coaxing lullabies she hadn't meant to play. The burned note haunted her still. I know what you're hiding. Its threat twisting darker now, wrapping itself around the life she carried. What if someone knew? What if Ethan found out? By the 6th month, her body had changed too much to ignore. Her belly rounded gently beneath her dresses, her movements slower, careful, her shifts longer as she worked tirelessly, saving every tip she could for a future she would face alone. Every night the lounge became both her refuge and her risk. Ethan owned the Lancaster, and though he no longer appeared, she felt his shadow in every corner, his presence lingering in the polished glass and gilded mirrors. She told herself he was gone for good, that he had chosen Isabella's world of glittering headlines and flashing lights. Yet the memory of his touch, his voice, his whispered promise, "I'll be gentle, but I can't promise I won't want more," slipped through her defenses when she least expected it, a quiet ache she could not silence. One late evening, when the lounge was nearly empty, she played a soft, haunting melody, her black dress flowing around her body, her shawl carefully arranged to disguise the swell of her belly. The crowd murmured quietly, oblivious, and she let the music carry her grief, her longing, her fragile hope. But then the atmosphere shifted, a ripple moving through the room. She glanced up, her fingers faltering and her heart stilled. Ethan Cross stood at the edge of the lounge. His coat hung open, his face shadowed but unmistakable. His eyes locked on her with a storm she could not name. Her pulse thundered, her fingers trembling as she forced the melody to completion, refusing to break under his gaze. The applause was faint, distant as she rose from the bench, every muscle screaming to flee. But Ethan moved closer, each step deliberate, his eyes falling to the curve of her body, the shawl slipping just enough to reveal the undeniable swell of her pregnancy. His expression hardened, his jaw tight, his fists curling at his sides as shock and fury collided in his face. For a moment she thought he would speak, demand answers, force the truth from her lips. Instead, he turned sharply, his coat flaring as he walked out, vanishing into the crowd as if he had never been there at all. Clara's knees buckled, her body sinking back onto the piano bench as the world blurred around her. He had seen, he knew, and just like before, he had walked away without a word. The rejection cut deeper than the headlines. deeper than the silence that had already broken her. She pressed her hand protectively to her belly, feeling the faint flutter of the life inside her, the only proof that she wasn't truly alone. But fear coiled inside her. Did he think it wasn't his? Did he not care? Or worse, did he know her darkest secret, the one from the burned note, and see this as proof of her unworthiness? The music had always been her shield. Now it was the only thing keeping her standing as the life she had built, fragile and desperate, threatened to unravel. 2 nights after Ethan Cross had seen her swollen belly and walked out in silence, Clara Monroe returned to the lounge, her black dress draped loose around her frame, her fingers heavy on the piano keys as she poured her pain into a slow, mournful melody. The crowd's chatter washed around her, meaningless, her music the only shield against the storm inside. But when she finished, as the final note faded, she saw him again, a shadow moving closer, his presence impossible to ignore. Ethan stood at the edge of the piano, his dark coat unbuttoned, his eyes blazing with something raw, something she could not yet name. "Clara," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the hum of the room. His gaze dropped to her belly, then back to her face. "Who's the father?" Her breath caught, her knuckles whitening against the piano. The question was a blade pressed straight into her chest. Anger flared, burning away the tremor in her voice. "Why do you care? You had her." His jaw tightened, the muscle flickering in his cheek, and for the first time his voice rose raw, unpolished, unguarded. "Isabella showed up drunk at a charity gala I was hosting. I walked her to her car and the paparazzi made it look like more. That headline was a lie, Clara. I never went back to her. That night I was on my way to you when a board meeting dragged me away." Her heart pounded, the ground tilting beneath her. His words struck hard, scattering the certainty she had clung to for months. She saw again the photo, Isabella's arm looped through his, their smiles sharp under neon lights, but now his voice cracked it open, shifting the truth she had built her hatred upon. "You walked away," she whispered, her voice trembling, her pain spilling into the open. "That night when I showed you the headline, you didn't say anything, you just left." Ethan's voice softened, but the edge of regret sharpened every word. "I was angry, not at you, at myself, for letting you believe I could hurt you. I thought you'd trust me enough to ask, to let me explain. But you shut me out, Clara. And now—" His eyes dropped to her belly, his voice faltering, breaking. "Is it mine?" The question hung between them like a cord left unresolved. Her throat tightened, fear choking her. She wanted to tell him, wanted to let the truth spill from her lips, but doubt wrapped chains around her tongue. What if this was another game? What if he only wanted to draw her close before tearing her apart? She turned sharply, gathering her sheet music, her hands trembling. "I can't do this, Ethan, not here." "Then where?" His voice pressed closer, urgent, relentless. "When? You can't keep running from me." Her eyes flared, her wounded heart hardening into defiance. "I'm not running. I'm surviving. You don't get to demand answers when you were the first one to walk away." The words struck him like a blow. For a long moment he said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with something between pain and resolve. Then he exhaled, the storm in his chest quieting into something steadier. "I'll wait," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper but strong enough to anchor itself in her chest. "But I'm not going anywhere this time." And then he turned, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Clara standing frozen, her heart pounding, the music's echo fading in her ears. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint flutter within. Her fear tangled now with something more dangerous. Hope. From that night on, Ethan Cross became a presence Clara Monroe could no longer shut out. He appeared at the lounge evening after evening, never demanding, never pressing, only waiting with a patience that felt like a vow. When her set ended, he would be there in the shadows, offering nothing but quiet company, his eyes steady and unyielding. One night he found her backstage, his voice low but firm. "Come with me. Not to talk, not to argue. Just to be somewhere safe." Something in his tone, in the steadiness of his gaze, broke through her defenses, and though fear clung to her, she nodded. He drove her to his penthouse, the city's lights spilling below like a jeweled river. Inside, he did not touch her, did not question her, only poured her a glass of water and sat across from her, the air humming with restraint. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Not just tonight, for good. Let me take care of you." Her throat tightened, the weight of his offer almost unbearable. "Ethan, I can't." But he cut her off gently, his eyes never leaving hers. I know I failed you once. I walked away when I should have stayed. I won't do it again. You don't have to decide now. Just stay tonight. And she did. Not because she fully believed him, but because carrying her secret alone had become too heavy. From then on, Ethan remained. He drove her to doctor's appointments, his hand wrapped around hers as the ultrasound revealed the steady flicker of a tiny heartbeat on the screen. He cooked for her when cravings struck, learning the art of late-night grilled cheese and ice cream runs. When back pain kept her awake, he held her until dawn, his breath steady against her hair as he whispered, I've got you. Slowly, the walls she had built began to crumble, the fear giving way to trust, the bitterness softening into something far more dangerous, hope. One evening, after an appointment where the sound of their baby's heartbeat filled the room like music, Ethan led her back to the penthouse. He kissed her then, slow and reverent, his hands framing her face as if she were something fragile and irreplaceable. I need you, he whispered, his voice raw, and this time Clara did not hold back. They made love with a tenderness that felt like a promise, every touch mending what had once been broken. Months later, as dawn broke across the city, Clara woke to sharp pain ripping through her body. Fear and anticipation collided as she gripped her belly, her voice breaking. It's time. Ethan was already at her side, calm but urgent, helping her dress, guiding her to the car as the city blurred past in streaks of gold and gray. Through every contraction, his hand anchored hers. His forehead pressed to hers as he whispered, You're doing this. Clara, you're stronger than you know. Hours blurred into agony and hope until finally, just as the sun crested the horizon, their son came into the world. Ethan held the tiny bundle first, his hands trembling, his eyes wet. You stole my heart before you even took your first breath, he whispered to the child, his voice breaking with wonder. Weeks later, the penthouse was no longer hers and his. It was theirs. The baby's soft breaths filled the space, grounding them in a rhythm that felt like forever. One morning, Ethan placed a velvet box in Clara's hands, his expression unguarded and sincere. Inside lay a key to the penthouse and a note in his sharp handwriting. That night I didn't just take your innocence. You gave me something far more precious, your heart. I will guard it for the rest of my life. Her vision blurred as she traced the words, her chest aching with a love she had tried so long to deny. In their bedroom, bathed in the golden glow of the rising sun, Clara lay between Ethan and their son, Ethan's arms stretched protectively around them both. His fingers brushed her shoulder as he pressed closer, a silent vow in every breath he took. The roses were gone, the secrets burned away, replaced now by something real. Not a performance, not a bargain, but a family. A beginning.